HR has been put in the hot seat the last couple of years. Any advice to your HR peers?
From my perspective, I always try to do the best by the company and the best by the employee. But it doesn't feel that way to employees. They feel that you are the company man and you are the marching orders. It's hard to make the employees happy and see the reasons behind it. It's important to communicate up, but running away from a question is going to speak volumes, and you should always address those things. I always like to walk around when I'm in an office, see if anyone has a question. But employees will see that you're a company person unless you show them that you're a real person. Because at the end of the day, I'm an employee of the company too. I want to do what's best for that company, but I live there too. So.
Today, we're going to talk about prioritizing employee relations to reduce the level of risks at your company. For strategic insights on how HR can balance respecting the needs of employees and doing what's right for the company, we've called in Jackie Plunkett, VP of Human Resources at SuccessFuel. Jackie Plunkett is a SHRM-certified professional with more than 25 years of experience as both an in-house practitioner and as a consultant in a variety of industries. She has extensive experience in employee relations, investigations, performance management, training and development, policy writing and enforcement, FMLA administration, conflict resolution, workers' comp claims, and unemployment hearings. In addition to Jackie's role as VP of Human Resources at SuccessFuel, she's a contributing writer to HRMorning.com, where she helps her HR peers tackle some of the most difficult issues facing them today. Jackie, welcome to Voices of HR.
Thank you, Berta. It's great to be here.
Well, we are so excited to have you here because I know that you're going to bring us some really good, unique perspectives today because you sat on both sides of the aisle. Let's start here because there is this interesting story that we were talking about. You were attending a SHRM conference and the presenter stopped and looked at you. Can you share with our audience what they said to you?
Yeah. So this all happened before I became a consultant, and I had recently moved from state to state and joined a company that I knew very little about. I had no idea that they had a terrible reputation. And when I found out, I made great efforts to turn it around because I didn't want to work for a company that had this kind of reputation, but I didn't know how deep it ran. So I was several years in. I was attending a SHRM legal conference. And, a lot of the sessions were kind of the same old, but this one was taught by a plaintiff attorney it was called something like how to make sure your employees don't become plaintiffs. And I thought, well, that sounds pretty good. So I went to this and I'm sitting there in this session and I'm the only one taking notes, and I'm taking notes rapidly. And he just kind of stopped and laughed and he said my name and I looked at him. I had no idea who he was. And he said, "You don't know who I am. But I know who you are, because when your company hired you, I stopped getting work. And your company paid for all my houses, and you're doing it right. So you don't need to take any notes." And I just sat there like, he knew me. And I went back to the office and I looked it up. He was the plaintiff attorney in at least four lawsuits that I had looked up. It was very interesting. But what he said, his whole session was basically about how, it was about compliance, right? But it was how to minimize risk. It was about respect and treating people fairly and really trying to do the right thing before it becomes issues. And that was what I tried when I tried to fix things in this company, because no one wants to work for a bad company or a company with a poor reputation. And, it was an uphill battle, but it wasn't completely up to me. But you try to set those trends and everything. But life is hard. Jobs can be hard. You don't have to take it personally. These are real people. It's human resources. So the fact of the matter was, a lot of the issues that happened stemmed from managers taking things personally, holding performance conversations rudely, disrespecting people. And, if you don't do those things and you kind of turn it around, there's a lesson there. And years later, when I wanted to become a consultant, I really took that session again to heart because I was teaching employers and companies and managers how to do this fairly, and they felt better about it. Like the whole process just became better and more thorough. And, it just kind of all ties back to it. But yeah, that was a huge compliment to have that shout out there in that session.
So you actually touched on some of the things that we want to talk to you about today, because everything that you just described, the lack of communication, poor communication, lack of respect, inadequate termination procedures, not only does HR have to lead within those circumstances, but sometimes they're actually the target of those behaviors from others within their organization. So what inspiring message can you give to HR as someone who really has, I think, emerged as someone who is strong and able to kind of tackle or at least address or navigate some of those most trying circumstances? And HR has been put in the hot seat the last couple of years, especially. Any advice as we start our conversation today to your HR peers?
My advice has changed so much over the years. And I'll say I was at one time told I was going to be given an intern that was new to HR. And I thought to myself, not now. I thought I'd become more cynical and I wasn't as hopeful and yay, good for you. And I didn't know how to tackle it. I really thought about it. And because, the HR person is really a target in a lot of ways too. I mean, from my perspective, I always try to do the best by the company and the best by the employee. But it doesn't feel that way to employees. They feel that you are the company man and you are the marching orders. And you have to be very careful of employees. Someone asks you to lunch, you have to always be questioning, is there an ulterior motive? How are the optics going to be on this if I start having lunch with somebody? There's so many things involved. And I really learned that lesson when I became a consultant. So I was a consultant that was not out on my own. I was actually within a company. And when I started, I was placed on a sales team. And the first day, no one said hello to me. No one cared I was alive. Nobody made a big deal. And I had never had that being in HR all those years. And I thought, wow, it's all fake. When you're the HR person, it's all fake. People just want to meet you and put in a good word and hi, let me know if you need anything.
It's the title, not the person. Yeah.
Really? So, there was kind of a lesson there, but not that that's, some people are just nice, but it was just, I started in a very busy company the day I started and no one noticed. And I loved it. It was very incognito mode. But, the way that you navigate in an HR department is tricky. But I feel like, SHRM has their ethics requirement and you have to meet the ethics credits. There's a lot to be said about that. Starting in any company, whether it's a great company, a troubled company, anything, it's hard to make the employees happy and see the reasons behind it. It's important to communicate, but I will say this, and this is a quote that I really liked. You should live in such a way that if anyone should speak badly of you, that no one would believe it. And I always thought that that was very important because if you're steady and you address things, you should always communicate. When an employee asks me, why did the company make this change? Many of us are upset. Well, I can't talk about the many that are upset, but I can talk to you. Can we talk about this? What are your issues with it? And you talk about it. It's not always easy to address, and you never want to say you don't know the answer to something, but you can follow back up. But running away from a question is going to speak volumes, and you should always address those things. I always like to walk around when I'm in an office, see if anyone has a question. But employees will see that you're a company person unless you show them that you're a real person. Because at the end of the day, I'm an employee of the company too. I want to do what's best for that company, but I live there too. So maybe, we changed the benefits and they're not as attractive as they used to be. Every company wants attractive benefits. This is how they attract talent. This is how they keep people. There must be reasons that they've made those adjustments. Now, I know I can live with them because, we've looked at all of these different things and I sit in a seat where I can make those decisions. but you can't always discuss all of those decisions, but you should try to be as transparent as you possibly can, whether it's based on business health or things that are coming down the road, changes up ahead. You should try, because I think it makes that divide between HR, the employees, the company, a little bit less, divided maybe.
Yeah, I think that's such an excellent point, that you're an employee as well.
Yes.
As well as representing the organization. And so I guess a couple of points on that. How the company decides to handle employee relations gives you a lot of insight, both as a leader and as an employee. And when you are sitting in that incredibly important spot in HR, you're navigating all of it. So you are not only representing the company, but you also need to do right by the employee. And we're going to talk about ethics here in a little bit, because I really want to pick your brain, because I have heard far too often from HR pros that I coach or consult with that most often they are put in a very serious situation because the employer is telling them to do something unethical and or illegal. And so we're going to touch on that here in a little bit. But you have also been put in quite a few situations, and I know we have to be careful about the stories that we tell, but can you think of a story where you have had to address a very sticky employee relations situation and you had to take into account policies and the company while at the same time doing right by the employee? Is there any story that pops in your head?
There's so many. And to be honest, a lot of them have to do with policies. So, with terminations, there's always risk, and people talk about compliance and risk. My mind goes in risk terminations, because as an HR person, I'm sure everybody has a bad termination story, where it's like, lock the doors, or something goes wrong. But sometimes with terminations, oftentimes with terminations, people can see this track and they're not surprised when someone leaves, maybe if it's a company's decision, or they think the employee was looking for another job and they leave. And depending on the size of your organization, people talk. If it's a layoff, that's the kind of thing that you can communicate in advance, and maybe not. I mean, layoffs we could talk about as a whole separate topic, but there have been times that I've had to be a part of separations that were company policies that were completely secret to the rest of the organization employees. And two such circumstances, I think I fired the most popular employee in the company. And in one case, I think only two people knew why, and the other one, no one did. And it's very difficult because something happens, there's either an occurrence that happens. In one case, our company policies changed and our requirements changed. But in both of those cases, there's a privacy issue. Again, these are people. They have families. They have lives. You have to be extremely quiet. And I almost want to say, unfortunately, I was. So no one understood the reasons. I was hated. At least I felt hated, that I let the most popular kid go. And it was not a comfortable situation. There was just information that came to light and the company had to act on it. In one scenario, there was an employee that felt so strongly about it that he was borderline threatening me, and years later got promoted to a senior management position. And I learned after this, first thing they did was pull the file and came over and apologized to me, because it was something you don't think of in everyday life. But I also gained a lot of respect from that, because I never cracked. I never told them, well, it's because of this, or, but a lot of companies have different policies, and I'm going to pick on something totally different. But, you think about policies, it comes back to ethics sometimes too, right? Maybe there's a conduct policy. Maybe you had an employee that was driving into work, and during their drive-in, had a road rage incident, and police tapped on the window and said, we need you to bring this employee up to the lobby. So something like that did happen somewhere where I worked. There was also a situation where we had an employee that changed states, and they were in a driving required position. And part of their motor vehicle report that came back, they had once lived in that state, was more revealing than when it had been in another state. And the crimes that were revealed, I was told by corporate, weren't allowable. So, I mean, and sometimes you're in a company that has a corporate, sometimes you are the corporate. It depends on the size of the organization. But these are not things you can talk about. And a lot of times when there is a change like this, there's fear. If there's something sudden, employees feel like, was this person warned? I don't think he was leaving. He was very happy yesterday. He was talking, and all of a sudden he's gone, and, and she fired him. And you can't talk about these things. But again, it kind of comes back to your conduct and how you hold yourself. And you touched on something with the ethics, and I know you wanted to go there a little bit deeper. But if you always keep your policies of kind of acting the same, and it's difficult, but you need a poker face in a lot of these situations. You need to kind of take a breath. I always try to see things from the perspective of the person talking to me. And if there is somebody upset about a termination, I'm not trying to react to that. I'm understanding why they're upset and how to solve their problem. And maybe they need to be pulled aside and spoken to or something, just to, diffuse the situation. But it's difficult. There's always reasons behind these things, but you can't always talk about them.
You can't. And I guess that lends to the question around the relationship that HR can and should have with employees. And I know you do a really great job of being proactive and building those bridges with employees so that when situations like this happen, they have a feeling that, okay, something big happened because we trust Jackie. We trust HR. We know that they're going to make a decision that's in the best interest of the company and of the employee. So could you give our HR audience a few tips on how to be proactive and build those relationships with employees?
You really just touched on it there. So you want to build trust. You want to treat people with respect. You want to make careful considerations in all scenarios as best you can. But think about it this way. I keep saying it's about human resources. There's people involved and respect and all that. But what does that really mean? If you worked with someone, think of someone, we've all had bad bosses. Everyone's had bad bosses. And then, everyone's had like the good ones too, or a good coworker or some sort of mentor relationship. Would you ever sue that mentor that you had the great relationship with? You don't want to. You don't sue people that you respect and think are fair. And the people that would give you the time to help you understand, the employer that warns you of your performance, someone that tries to offer more training and all of that. When you really listen to people and you try to meet their needs as best you can. Now, in an organization, it always depends on the scenario. Whatever it may be, though, as long as you're treating people with compassion, you're having empathy, it doesn't really matter the message sometimes, as long as you're doing that and you're taking that step. And that's one way to greatly minimize risk, to be honest. I've been brought into a lot of organizations that were secretive. And they would just, this is the policies, this is what we're doing this time, and these are the benefits, and they would make massive changes. And I said, but think of how that is impacting them. And in some cases, I came into organizations where the employer would have like the platinum benefits, and that was fine, and because they could afford it. And then it was just a mech plan for everybody else. Well, if you want benefits, it's over there. And, the co-pays were like $80, and it was ridiculous. And it was cheap per paycheck, but it was maybe had co-insurance, and it wasn't a good plan. And I always try to coach them from, imagine you had to take the benefits. How would you feel about that? And, just put yourself in their shoes kind of a situation, no matter what it was. Maybe it wasn't benefits. Maybe it was PTO. So let me get this straight. Your full-time people don't have any time off until they've been here 6 months, and then they get 2 days their first year. I mean, I've had this happen. And they'll tell me, well, we want people to be here. Okay, so what kind of people do you have here? So, I mean, everyone has a life. And
right, robots?
Right. I mean, there's a work-life balance because they were, in points policies. There's a lot of things that can get in the way. But I always try to tell my clients, if you're going to come up with a policy, make that policy for the employee you like the best. And then try to apply it to the employee that's causing you the most problems. It has to work for both. You can't have the best PTO policy. You have to test it. But I would tell them to think of the person. Who's your favorite person here? Would you fire them because their car didn't start? I bet you wouldn't. So you've got to do the fair and equal treatment. You've got to do that thing where you draw the line in the sand and you treat everybody fairly and consistently. And it's, putting policies around it helps.
I love that. Create policies for the employee that you like the most. Never have heard that before. That's awesome. All right. So you also have an approach to encouraging open and honest cultures. How do you do that? I mean, how do you proactively? Is that something, HR is a subset of the organization. Do you encourage leaders to behave in a certain way? Is that policy again? Is that learning and development? You have an extensive background, I think, in every discipline in HR. How do you encourage that type of behavior throughout your organization?
So when it comes to having, fair treatment across the board and all of this and walking the walk, really in our organization, it can't be a shouted down from the top of the mountain kind of a thing. I get the whole term for that. But, if your CEO is saying these are the rules and he's not sticking to it or she's not sticking to it, that's a problem. Those rules have to be for everybody and they have to embrace it. And my favorite organizations that I've worked with and I've worked in, the leadership is just as humble as anyone else. They not only follow the policies, they understand the restrictions with them. If there's a new initiative, I one time worked with a leader that was trying to change things. And he continuously kept, preaching this. Then this is what we're doing now. And this is what we're doing now. And I went to him and said, can't you tell that they're not following you? You're just shouting out orders and you're not leading. They're not walking with you. You need to pause, and instead of keep telling the whole company, you need to find out the problems between your management team and see why they're not walking with you. Because when it's embraced, it moves, it happens. And sometimes that's the problem. Sometimes your top leader is the issue. Sometimes it's the management team doesn't embrace what's supposed to happen. But there has to be a cohesiveness. And it's difficult in larger organizations, but I've seen it happen. And I've worked for some pretty big ones. So really, and there's always somebody that doesn't want to follow it. But you really just need that agreement. And it might not be that they completely agree with the initiative itself, but they might understand what's trying to be achieved. And they might just go along with it. But that's fine. If you have somebody on the team that's being a deterrent, that's detracting from this, that's dragging it down, it will take you back so far, and it takes you back in the culture. People feel it when it's not embraced, and they kind of pick to their own thing of what to follow and what not to follow. But when you really have leadership that tries to make themselves available, that has town halls, that will answer questions. I one time worked in an organization where we had this amazing leader. He would say hello to people, knew their names, would look at them, ask how they were doing. He left the organization, replaced himself. He had moved up and asked me how things were going. And I said, fine. And, asked why. And I said, you replaced your talent, but you didn't replace your bedside manner. And I said, this person leaves their office, doesn't make eye contact, doesn't say hello to anyone. So I finally went to the new person and said, hi, I know this is, new to you and you're running this whole big organization and everything, but I'll tell you a secret. The last leader didn't know anybody's names, which, maybe he did. But I said, you can still look at people and say hello. Turned out the leader was a little shy, but the impression was people were not behind them. Just felt like this is someone that doesn't care about us. We don't matter. They're not looking at us. They're not talking about us or talking to us. And really, it just goes a long way to just be that person. So a lot of times with your culture, it's a top-down thing. And I would really look at how the C-suite's behaving.
So I took a couple of notes as I was listening to you. And I think one of the things that HR pros struggle with today is managing up and having those candid conversations that are required for the organization to be successful. because either the C-suite doesn't want to hear it, the CEO doesn't want to hear it. They just want HR to go away and just go do policy, right? Or figure out what the next raise is going to be, the raise pool. So what you just described was becoming an advocate for leadership by being honest with them. And do you have any other advice for HR pros that are finding it difficult to do that and therefore are unable to really fully do their job?
Yeah. Sometimes it's a failure. Sometimes there's just no way. I have worked in companies and with companies where one of the higher level people just was the problem. And I could read the Glassdoor reviews and say, well, that's true. And there was nothing I could do about it because, and it was terrible. And it really literally happened. And so one day, one of the C-level people actually called me in because I was handling all the employee relations at that time and said, why can't you get me a person that stays? They all leave within, the first year for sure. And you're so tempted to be like, because of you. But you can't say that. But when you have a toxic leader person, sometimes you can try and politely make your point. Which I did try, well, let's look at the people and just kind of break it down. This person felt stressed and overwhelmed. Let's look at the job and kind of point back. If you're not comfortable just blatantly saying you're the problem. And sometimes you can go to another member of the organization, which I did. And I was told, well, that's too bad because that person will not change. And this is a primary. And there was no way to get around it. We were just going to have to live with a changing door. And I tried to isolate that leader from permeating the rest of the organization. I mean, it's unfortunate, but it happens. I mean, we can't just, HR people aren't magical. So sometimes you have those organizations. And for me, I like to be able to make a difference. So if you can't, sometimes you move on. But in an organization where there is a cohesive message and mission and, people are trying to get things done, you can typically, by providing evidence, whether it's in, turnover reports or performance or feedback or reviews on Glassdoor, you can a lot of time make your argument in a very polite way that's sometimes heard if you just go about it correctly. And I always think it's worth it because I have told people that you would tell me, no, that person absolutely knows they're overbearing or that they're rude or that their tone is condescending. I'm telling you, they usually don't know it. And I've been shocked too. So that's why I kind of mention it.
Yeah, and I would say in those situations too, not being able to address it directly, they just kind of defined HR's job.
Yeah.
Right? At least for that particular person. And so I think a lot of times the challenge becomes the individual wants to come in and make a difference. And most people in HR are for it in the job for the same reason that you just mentioned. They want to help people. They want to make a difference in people's lives in a positive way. But if you're in an organization where they don't want to hear the feedback, where you can't have those candid conversations, kind candor is as Claude Silver. Claude Silver was a guest on VaynerMedia, and she talked about kind candor. If you can't do that, then I think HR, your job has just been defined for you, what you're able to do and what you're able not to do.
It's so true. And I will say there have been jobs I've gone for in my career that I've really wanted. I went for, and there's different reasons too. A lot of time I would shy away from a head of people position, not because I didn't think I could handle it, but because I was very opinionated about getting my work done. And I'm a hard worker and I wanted to touch everything. You mentioned how well-rounded I am. There's a reason for that. I wanted to know everything and how it worked. But then you kind of get frustrated when you get to a certain level in your career too, because you want to see that it's working the way you kind of imagine it. You come up with your little dream team and how you would function with it. I have interviewed at jobs that I've really wanted and I've not gotten them. And sometimes I've looked back and thought, what a blessing. I'm so glad I didn't. But a lot of times it was because of the climate. It was because of the culture. It was the person I was interviewing with. There's not a chemistry. And I always talk about this. My employees will have heard this before. I would talk about evil HR departments. Evil HR departments are your company man. They get the marching orders and they put it into effect, and so terrible. But I actually had I had a demo site for HR stuff for, testing things out in my HRIS system. And I had the evil HR lady was my test person. And it was the picture of Roz from Monsters, Inc. Because I just thought of that, like, Wazowski, just this very dry, sarcastic person. But I've met these people. And, and I remember I laughed once in an interview, and the interviewer told me I probably wouldn't fit in there. And I thought, because I laughed, I was just being myself. And I'm so grateful when I don't get
no
those
fun
guys.
zone.
Yeah, so bad. Because, you spend a lot of time at work. You really need to be able to be yourself and voice your concerns. And, communication is huge. The companies that get the biggest dings are the ones that are transparent, that are afraid of telling people what's going on. You have to find a way to communicate what's going on, or there is a problem.
Yeah.
And, there is a way. I'm sure of it. There's a way.
In fact, I was just doing some research the other day, and there is a new site, and I'm sure other people know about this, particularly in the HR space, called Comparably. It's a site where employees can go in, similar to Glassdoor, and rate the organization, except they're very specific about diversity and toxicity, and the CEO gets a rating just like Glassdoor, except it goes into more in depth, and you can actually see how many people have provided feedback. And so to that point, and then I saw a video today before I came in on this woman who just got let go from her organization. And she recorded a video and put it out on social media, and, and basically said to the CEO, do you understand what you're doing to people's lives? And so as I think about HR and I think about ethics and integrity and doing the right thing by people, I guess one of the tests is whatever you're going to decide to do, think of it as if it's going to show up on Comparably, or if it's going to show up on a video on social media, because it could. And so that leads me to ethics.
So one thing about the reviews you're mentioning, I've always said that I have friends that live by open table reviews and Yelp reviews. And I read reviews differently, probably than the average person, Glassdoor, any of these things. In my opinion, you go to Yelp to complain. How many times do you think, I think I'll go to Yelp and give this establishment 5 stars and rave about it? And not unless they ask you to write a positive review,
Right.
which then I'm like, why? What did you do? And I start reading. But, when it comes to employees reviewing a company, I also, especially when I'm interviewing at that company, I will read the reviews, but I'll look at where they're located and what their position is. Maybe they're in a call center and they can't get up as easily as someone that has free reign as an executive. And all right, that tells me maybe your policies need some editing and I can maybe help with that. But, when you read these reviews, a lot of times people feel scorned. Maybe their performance wasn't evaluated properly. Maybe they had a bad manager. And maybe that bad manager was valued by an organization. And one bad leader in a company does more damage than having a mediocre leader. So, a lot of times there are problems with these things. But even when you go to apply for jobs, if you allow the engine, whether it's Indeed or LinkedIn, to know about your prior job, if you type that in, it will ask you to review that prior company. Mm-hmm. So everybody's reviewing everything. But you have to kind of consider the source on a lot of it. It is what it is, though. Reviews are out there.
They are. And videos now, apparently.
Well,
all right. So let's talk about ethics,
Yes.
because this is such an important topic, I think, to both of us, which is HR can sometimes be asked, a lot of us have been in that situation, to do something unethically,
Perfect.
illegally, or both. Let's start here. What's the risk to the HR person
Oh, huge.
if they do it?
So, it's funny. And we kind of talked about this once before. When I was early in my career, I started off in, HR assistant roles, payroll. I did little things and tasks, and sometimes it was considered the accounting department. Sometimes I was considered part of the HR department. But at one time, I was asked to do some tasks for the 401k plan that felt very inappropriate. I had no training on this. I had no knowledge of it. And I had no idea it was an ethics issue. I just came forward and said, I'm not comfortable doing this. Who did this before me? And they said, well, the CFO. Okay, well, I've been out of college 2 years, so I see why you gave it to me. But I just started questioning it. And, I started researching, should I be doing this? And it turned out I shouldn't. There was some personal liability involved in doing it incorrectly. And all I asked for was something in writing that I wouldn't be held liable. Well, they wouldn't give it to me, so I didn't do it. And that was something I learned very early on. If you're being asked to do something and it doesn't pass the sniff test, try to cover yourself before you're doing these things. So I will say, as an HR person, I'm asked all the time. There'll be a consultant, whatever, that asks me, okay, the first thing we need to do is get rid of this person. They're just poison. They can't do anything right. Well, so why'd you wait for me? Well, thanks. Or if you're coming new into the organization, but they'll tell you this. And whether you've been there 10 years, if a manager comes to you and says, this person's an issue, I need to get rid of them. Well, why is the first time you're hearing about this? So I always start with why. I feel like I turn into an attorney. Why would you like to get rid of them? How long have you known about this problem? What have you done before? And I try to get all those facts and paint the picture. And usually they know what I'm getting at. Like, why are we just addressing this now? If it's a performance thing, then sure. If they're not going to perform to the standards we need, we will move on this person or replace them with someone that will. But am I going to do it today? No, there's too much risk in that. And it's risk to the organization. I love when employers tell me that we live in an at-will state. That does not mean...
Oh, that's the best.
Yeah, that does not mean what you
Please
want it to
clarify
mean.
it, because we need to hear this over and over and over again. Yes,
please. I've had leaders that have said to me, but we live in an at-will state. It says it in our handbook that we can... And no, that's not what that means. You still need to follow Listen, if you don't want to think about it from the person that you're inflicting this upon, think about it for your remaining staff. If you work in the Wild West, where you just come out of your office and say, you're not doing a good job, you're gone, how do you think the person next to them feels? Do they want to stay in that organization? It creates a fear culture. You need to treat people correctly. So as an HR person, when someone would come to me with something outlandish, and I've heard a few, whether it was an idea for a social event, or just performance measures or whatever it was, I've always said, okay, I understand you want to make this change happen. Why? What's our, is there a deadline for this? What's the target? Try to get your hands on that. And what they're offering as the solution is, we're just going to fire the whole sales team and start new. Okay, maybe that's not practical. But I've always tried to come up with, again, monkey in the middle, right? I try to do what's best by the employee and the company. But in that case, you're thinking of the risk. And I like to think of all the things that could go wrong if you do this. So I've never told somebody, no, you can't terminate them, but I'm going to tell you everything that could happen if we do this incorrectly. And it's things sometimes in the blind spots that they don't see. And a lot of it comes from experience. And I will say, as HR people, if we could talk to each other more and tell our horror stories, you'd learn a lot. But sometimes you have to learn as you go, kind of a thing. But the most valuable HR person is the one that minimizes risk. And that company I spoke about earlier, when I was early in my career, and I went to that session, they didn't necessarily think I was a great HR person, because nothing happened when I was there. I never got dragged into court. I was never tested. But I knew I was, because after I left, by the way, I was told that the lawsuits picked up again. And, that's pretty telling. But, the biggest part with HR, people come to you and they want things done. And you have to mitigate that risk, minimize the risk, expose the risk, try to avoid the risk. If you do your job right, people shouldn't even think that you really make much of a difference. They should just be like, I don't know, she sits in her office all day. But, it is one of those things. Sometimes you can't prove that you're worth it. And I think that's why we had a problem getting to the table at one point, to be honest. It was, think of your C-suite and the head of people. Well, what are they going to do? So it's one of those things. Keep you out of
jail. That's what yeah. Keep the risk from showing up.
Right.
So let's look ahead to 2024. what do you think in 25? What do you think are going to be the biggest challenges for HR, and what should they proactively do about it?
So, we still, I'm so tired of speaking about what happened from 2020 to recent years, but COVID left its own kind of ripples. And one of them I think everybody feels personally is the cost. There's a higher cost to do everything currently. Hopefully that changes in the near future. But it's impacting your organizations. Maybe they've had to renegotiate their shipping contracts or their supplies, or they've changed how they do things because of costs. A lot of companies have eliminated phones, and there's a lot of things that have been going on with that. The interesting thing is, the hiring keeps pivoting and pivoting and pivoting and changing how they're doing things. But it all comes back to really your productivity. There was this push to be hybrid, then remote, then people wanted to stay hybrid after the remote. And now you feel a great deal of leaders trying to push people back into the office. And it really stems back to not physically being in the office. I mean, it's true. Some companies rent space and they just want to see it filled up. But it's about productivity. And what you really need to do is hold people more to performance goals and performance analysis and really look at your results and see how that ties back. It's nothing new, but I feel like that's a bigger topic now because of the state of where people are located in their office. This year, I'm noticing a great deal of, I don't know if you've noticed, but they've hired a lot of inspectors for the DOL in the past few months. And the first thing I thought of is a new DOL inspector isn't going out to do an audit alone. They're bringing their new training. So when the Department of Labor sends you that notice and says that they're going to want all your timesheets and they'll be here on this date, you need to call your attorney. Because when they show up with a witness, there won't be any deals made if there ever were before, which I doubt there were. But audits have really picked up. They've got to make up for their lost money somehow. And, there are changes with their I-9s. The wage and hour laws keep changing. Once again, we're talking about the salary threshold. So it's a really good time to do your audits yourself before someone comes to the door. And if you don't know how, take a webinar. There's a lot of them out there. And AI is really big now, not just if you've gone to place a job lately. If you start to write the title, in most platforms, it actually asks you, is this a good job description? And it will try to finish loading that. It wants to make itself useful. But how to use AI? This has been all over the news. Certain states saying you can't use a tool to evaluate resumes. You can't, what you can and can't do with AI. And I'm picking on hiring, but there's so many parts of it. Should AI be answering questions for HR people? What are the implications of that, for your employees? A lot of technology, it's moving pretty fast. But I will say it all comes back to your communication and your treatment with everything. Because, let's face it, fair treatment does not make headline news as often as the poor treatment. So if you think your AI tool is doing it wrong, step in. And as far as the trends, it's the same thing. It's churned up a little bit more. It's whatever the legislation is passing. And compliance keeps changing. I don't think I've ever seen this many laws change, and localities and all the town posters and all of these differences that are popped up today. So I would say it's a challenge, but you really have to stay on top of all of these trends. Sign up for the DOL website reminders, and that's actually very interesting if you've ever done that. If you go to the Department of Labor site and sign up for their newsletter, they will actually send you weekly all the violations that they found at different companies. It's a little eye-opening.
Yeah, and I also track the EEOC too. In fact, I just got an email that popped up on 2023 claims, and I think it doubled, more than 50% increase in discrimination claims.
Yes,
by the EEOC, and some of them were systemic. Had groups of employees. So yes, the government is watching, and they're going to hold these companies accountable. So all great tips and tools. All right, unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our regularly scheduled program. but we do something at the end called rapid fire questions.
Hit me.
These are one sentence questions with one sentence answers. Are you willing to play?
Sure.
All right. We want to get to know Jackie a little bit better. So, question number 1, what's the biggest challenge you're facing as an HR leader today?
I think we just touched on it, but really the change, and I'm thinking of the change as far as compliance goes. It's always a concern, especially in HR. You need to watch that.
How are you dealing with it? And I know you said track the DOL, EEOC. Anything else? Any other tips and tools?
When you're a consultant, if you really are a good consultant, and I think I was a good consultant, I really cared about the companies that I helped. A lot of them were smaller companies. Some of them didn't have an HR department. Some of them had large HR departments. But if I was worried about their business in some way, it kept me up at night. So I tracked everything for them. I watched all the laws change. I signed up for there's a lot of employment attorneys that will offer free blogs and newsletters and things like that I would sign up for sometimes, follow people on LinkedIn, kind of watch these things change, because you need to, there's a lot of SHRM members, because if you have your certification, you sign up for those things. Admittedly, I skim a lot of it. You don't read it. There's a lot of different websites, HRMorning, there's all these different ones that are out there. But keeping those channels turned on and reviewing those things, sometimes you can read a story somewhere. It doesn't directly pertain to you, but there'll be something there that'll make you think about your organization. That's important. Go research it. There's all these different tools out there, even if you start with an AI engine. But it's important to find your own way with that, your tool book.
What are some bad recommendations you hear in HR being passed off as best practices?
I love when people tell me not to tell people the reasons behind things because they won't understand. That's the worst thing you can do.
Oh. What's your first 90-day playbook as the head of HR?
I like to take a look and see how things are happening. I really think it's important to keep a quiet entrance and see how things are functioning before you make changes. Everyone's opinionated and wants to redecorate their office, but really you need to attend all the meetings you can as a spectator, meet everybody, talk with them about their people, and get to know the organization before you make any suggestions. I think that's the best way to do it.
What advice would you give someone just starting out in HR?
Be honest. Just when I used to take job interviews, I used to tell them that I wouldn't lie and I wouldn't do anything illegal. Surprising that some people were surprised that I said that. But I think that really, so long as you stick to, if you're the expert in HR, you tell them why. If someone says, do this, and there's something that rubs you the wrong way, I shouldn't do that because. Explain. Even to who you report to, I think it would help.
When you get overwhelmed, how do you refocus?
I take a break. If you walk around the office, if you go outside, go get a cup of coffee, you redirect yourself. It's just like if you've ever focused on Excel too long and then you feel like you can't see anything else. When you get too involved in something or can't find the clear path, just step away and breathe and you'll find your way back to it.
If you could have your own billboard that would reach millions of people, what would your message be?
Well, first of all, I would never do that. I mean, it's tough for me to even put a LinkedIn photo up. But, as far as the billboard goes, I guess it would, it's just not me.
That's funny. I've never had anybody answer it that way, but.
Yeah. Well, as far as a billboard goes, I hate to sound so, it's all about honesty and be the nice HR person. You're not always the nice HR person, but you really just have to be, a strong one. Stick to your guns, do what's right.
What is the book or books you have given most as a gift and why?
So I actually love the book, Who Moved My Cheese? So remember Who Moved My Cheese was such a big, back in the day. And what's that about? It's all about change. It's a super short book. It's just a great analogy. It just gives you this impressionable summary of change. And I've never worked in an organization that didn't face change. And sometimes it's drastic, new ownership, new directions. But change happens to all of us in our personal life and our professional life. And I think probably on a daily basis, I could find someone to give it to. And I forced my kids to read this as well. It's a good one.
What underrated tools are indispensable for your job?
So the tools are everywhere these days. I mean, if you can't find one on the internet, it's kind of surprising. Empathy. I mean, really, empathy goes a long way. And but everything else is on the internet.
Just got to find it. Google machine. If you had 10 times the HR budget you have now, what would you spend it on?
In companies where employees struggle the most, I found that they didn't feel that they had the tools they needed. Whether it's the programs or they just needed a redesign or something. If I had the money, I would fix things so that employees felt that they were capable. They had not capable, as far as what they bring to the table, but what I bring to the table. The good programs, the good, tools that they need to get their job done successfully. Let's see if we can really turn that up and move it faster. But that would be a beautiful thing.
Where can people go to learn more about you?
I'm on LinkedIn. And if you go to my LinkedIn, you'll see that I'm also a contributing writer for HRMorning. And there's a lot of good stuff on there. So you can find me as sometimes being interviewed on there as well as contributing articles too.
Today, we have been joined by Jackie Plunkett, VP of Human Resources at SuccessFuel. Thanks again for joining me, Jackie. It has been such a pleasure.
Thank you, Berta.
I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Thanks so much for watching. We would love it if you shared your thoughts on any of the topics we discussed in the comments below. And if you got value from the video, it would mean the world to us if you hit the like button and subscribe to the HRMorning channel. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Voices of HR.